My name is GiBi, this is Toto, and welcome to the Horror Homestead. This is another video on my ongoing series where I'm dissecting the Fazbear Frights series of Five Nights at Freddy's novels. In these videos, we summarize, analyze, and theorize about a different story in the ongoing anthology series. This video is about the 8th book's third story, What We Found. I'm currently a believer in the Frights fiction fan theory, which states that all of these books are actually in-universe novels written and published and sold by Fazbear Entertainment during the Pizzaplex era, in order to obfuscate the horrors of their past, or maybe just to make money. The story was written by Andrea Wagner, as were all of the stories in the physical book Gumdrop Angel, and this is now the final time we have to talk about this stupid, dumb book. I mean, technically we have to talk about the Stitch Wraith, but we are soon going to be free from its horrible cover. So let's talk about What We Found. Hudson and his friends Dwayne and Barry work at Fazbear's Frights, the horror attraction that we see in FNAF 3. Hudson has a tragic backstory that we unlock as the story goes. His stepfather was extremely abusive, both mentally, emotionally, as well as physically, to the point where Hudson has a fused spine in his discs. Hudson has fused discs in his spine because of the physical abuse that his stepfather Lewis put him through. A few years ago, Hudson's house caught on fire, killing his mother and stepfather, and Hudson was at first suspected of starting it, but then cleared of all charges. But people do still treat him unfairly because of it. He denies having anything to do with it, but everyone's like, maybe it was him. Because of this trauma, he's a little screwy in the head. He was also left with some pretty bad burns on his leg, which prevent him from joining the Navy. His friends Dwayne and Barry got accepted, so they're going to be leaving soon, leaving Hudson all alone in their hometown. Because he's poor, he has to work the night shift. He's doing like a double shift. He's doing like the night shift and then also some like crewman stuff during the day for Fazbear's Frights, whereas Barry and Dwayne only do like the during the day crewman stuff. He's getting more money for a more difficult job and longer shifts. There's a girl they meet who works there named Faith. Hudson and she share a spark and they go on a date and it goes really well. But then that night, Faith learns about Hudson's past. He calls her to set up a second date and she says, "Did you set the fire? Did you do it? Are you arson man?" And he gets really upset because he's like, oh no, she's going to treat me differently now. She doesn't believe me. And then that's really the end of it. She says she doesn't want to go on a second date because she thinks that he killed his mother and stepfather. Then one of his friends starts dating her, which sucks. The first part of the story, much like Bunny Call, is just a build-up for the second part of the story, which is when all the action takes place. So, we meet Hudson, we meet his friends, it's setting up all the pieces so that when he starts to fight off Springtrap in Fazbear's Fright, we learn all the context that will be important. For example, Hudson notes some large ovens in the kitchen. He turned down one long hall and then headed up another, took side steps into fake storage, wardrobe, and supply closets. Switched back through the replica of a pizzeria kitchen, complete with working industrial-sized ovens, so big Hudson would fit inside them. We also learn about Hudson's grandmother, who practices voodoo. Granny Foster was a seer, who claimed to know the future, but never bothered to tell anyone else about it. She didn't have any particular faith or belief system, including voodoo, but she thought voodoo dolls were a hoot, and she liked using them to mete out justice to unpleasant people. "Why, Granny?" 12-year-old Hudson asked her once. "Why do they work for you when you don't even believe in voodoo?" Granny Foster, who always wore big men's plaid flannel shirts with baggy jeans, rocked in her chair on the front porch and said, "I believe in what I believe, and because I believe it, it works for me." "I don't know what that means," Hudson said. "You don't know what to believe, that's why life knocks you around the way it does." Granny Foster liked to say that heat and fire purged, and she was right. Sort of. When his family's house burned down at the end of his senior year, it purged Hudson of Lewis and his mother. But it didn't purge his torment. That just worsened. After Hudson gets the job at Fazbear's Frights, Granny tells him to leave. But Hudson refuses. "Why should I quit?" Hudson asked. "What do you know about Fazbear's Frights?" She squinted at him. "All I need to know." She reached out and squeezed his hand. "I care about you, Hudson. Quit your job." There she went again, saying nothing substantive. It was just more of her silly voodoo. Hudson shook his head. "If I give in," he shook his head again. "I can't." Granny sighed. "Your path is your own." She held his gaze for several minutes. Several minutes? Yeah, okay. Imagine if the entire length of this video you'd just been staring silently at your grandmother. During the section of setup, we also meet the day guard, whose name is Virgil. He had over 5 hours to go before Virgil would come back to relieve him for a few hours. Virgil was supposed to come in at 7, along with Barry and Dwayne, but he was usually late. The building, as it's described, makes it pretty clear that it's the same Fazbear's Fright from the game, but we get to see and hear things that we didn't hear in the game. For example, "Get this," Dwayne said. "This was found inside a hidden room in one of the pizzerias." Barry smiled. Faith is really excited about it. She said they're going to put it in a hidden room here now, and it's going to be the best feature in the whole attraction. Now, I should note that this story cannot be in game's continuity. I'm going to talk about this more in the analysis section, but this is not a prequel to FNAF 3. It's a retelling of sorts. There are some very obvious differences, like there's a kitchen here that's not in the games. Hudson works in a real security guard office, which is separate to the attraction's fake office. Like, he literally says he has a real office he sits in, and then there's a fake office, which is what Mike would sit in the game. Very weird. Also in this story, Bonnie is purple. Who thought of purple bunnies and foxes with eye patches? Hudson's arm had brushed a purple bunny hand as he went by. So it's unclear how much information we can actually take from this story to tell us things about the game. Like, there's important information we get about the building, and I don't know if we can use that in the game lore. The entire interior of Fazbear's Frights, although in a brand new building, had been made to look like a long abandoned space. Fazbear's Frights was being set up to be a sort of expanded replica of a Freddy Fazbear's restaurant, not a true representation of any one of the actual old places. This attraction spliced together aspects of the infamous pizzerias with all the murderous history. So does that mean that's also true for the games? Because some people think that the FNAF 3 location is Fredbear's Family Diner, or it's the MCI location. This is saying it's a new building, just outfitted to look like none of the actual real restaurants. But since this book is not actually games canon, does that information hold over from the book to the games? I don't know. Then one day they find one. A real one. An animatronic from a real Freddy's. Springtrap is brought into the building, and from this point onward, things go very, very poorly for Hudson. As the night guard, he's alone in the building after hours, and he walks over to Springtrap and takes a good look at him. He's scared of all of the animatronics, but something about Springtrap is different, because inside of Springtrap, he thinks he can see a human corpse. This is what starts the second half of the story. While looking at Springtrap, Hudson hears a voice. It doesn't really come from anywhere, it seems to be coming from Springtrap actually, but it sounds like his old school teacher, Mr. Atkins. Mr. Atkins starts calling him dumb. He hallucinates Lewis, his stepdad, beating him up. Then he thinks he sees Springtrap moving around the building. He runs into the bathroom to hide from him, and then suddenly he's a little kid getting his head shoved in the toilet by bullies. The toilet is flushed, he gets a swirly, and then suddenly he finds himself just like standing up, looking in the mirror. He's back in the Freddy's bathroom. There's no water on the floor. He's woken up from this memory. There's a vent duct, and he's scared that Springtrap's going to come get him, so he goes into the vent duct, and he's chased by a vent duck. Chica comes chasing him through the vents. He escapes, but then Foxy's chasing after him, dual-wielding sharp things like knives. Hudson gets a knife and he tries to fight off Foxy, but he's swinging the knife around wildly, and then he actually cuts his own arm. He thinks Foxy did it, but it's pretty clear from the text that he actually did it himself. Some ghost force throws him across the room, like he's tossed, like it's a paranormal activity or something. And he lands on his wrist poorly and breaks it so badly that the bone pokes through the skin. Wasn't he slipping in and out of his present and past? For a second, he was a kid pretending he had the courage to go after the bullies who hurt him. But it was just a second. He knew where he was, and he knew he had to go on the offensive, or he was going to lose his mind. So he's aware that he's slipping in and out of his memories, but he does really think he's being chased by the animatronics. He wasn't going to be a sniveling kid anymore. He was going to stand up to the bullies and his miserable stepdad. He was going to go rabbit hunting. Hudson giggled at his joke. This is not a joke, Hudson. This is nothing. Maybe if it said wabbit hunting, it still wouldn't be a joke, it would just be a reference. What are you giggling at, Hudson? So in addition to bullies and his stepdad and his teacher, Faith's voice then gets added into the chorus of people mocking him. Hudson shook his head and willed himself to see what was real and what wasn't. Stupid, a different mouth said. All the mouths sounded like Mr. Atkin. Stop it, Hudson shrieked. Stop it. All the mouths advanced on him. Stupid, 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 stupid. The assault came from inside and outside his head, and it came from all around him as the mouths fell endlessly from the vent opening and pressed toward him in a ghastly chorus of judgment. Hudson tried to get up and run, but the mouths were like marbles flung all over the floor. He lost his balance and fell. and then they overran him. Mouths crawled all over him. They skittered up his legs, slithered through his hair, and hopped from one end of his body to the other. Hudson flailed and kicked. He shrieked some more. When a mouth tried to crawl inside his mouth, and another one began to burrow in his ear, he started hearing rumbling in his head, like a thunderstorm was unleashing itself inside of him. That's when he lost it. He wet his pants. This is the second story where the main character wets themselves. Thank you, Scott. While being chased by the animatronics, Hudson lost his keys, so he's locked inside of the building, so he just has to wait with his bleeding arm and his broken wrist until Virgil comes to get him in the morning. He thinks to himself that he can hide from Springtrap in the giant ovens that we saw in the beginning of the story. So he does. He crawls inside and he starts unlocking suppressed memories about when he was beaten up by Lewis and his house fire. I will talk about this in the analysis section. As he's resting inside of the oven, hiding from Springtrap, he starts to hear his grandmother's voice. Hudson reached out with his right hand and tugged on one of the industrial oven doors. As soon as it opened, he gingerly climbed inside the oven. There he sat, stretched out his legs, and grabbed the door. He pulled it closed with a satisfying whump. Finally, he was safe. A popping sound yanked Hudson from his reverie. What was that? He listened, and he heard a rustling sound and a snap. In the oven, something whirred, then made a little spitting sound. Hudson heard a concussive burst like a backdraft blowing open a door. He looked down at his empty hands. The cool walls of the oven started warming up. Hudson shot away from the oven walls. No! Panicked, Hudson kicked at the oven door. It didn't budge. Open the door! He shouted. He kicked again. The door remained closed. Oh, Hudson, a voice said. It was Granny Foster. Hudson looked around the oven and tried to see through the thick glass opening in the door. He couldn't see anyone. Granny, get me out of here! Hudson yelled. Oh, Hudson, Granny's voice repeated. Her voice wasn't coming from outside the oven. It was inside, with Hudson. The oven got hotter. Hudson started to sweat. Help me! Hudson heard what sounded like a sigh rushing through the oven. Your path is your path, Granny's voice said. And the oven got hotter and hotter. That's not the end, though. We get the signature Fazbear Frights, the main character dies, and then it cuts to a different perspective as people wander into the situation, totally oblivious to what's actually happening. So Dwayne and Barry come to work the next day. They look through the building and they're like, where's Hudson? They don't see any blood, so all the stuff about him cutting his arm and bleeding everywhere and breaking his wrist, like, either that didn't happen, so that's why there's no blood, or Springtrap mopped up after himself. I'm unsure. Then we get the end of the story. What's that smell? Barry wrinkled up his face. Dwayne covered his nose. Smells like something burning. Hey, did you hear about the fire at the circus? What? It was intense. Dwayne laughed loudly. Get it? Intense? Barry shook his head. Hudson, he called. They waited, breathing shallowly. No one answered. Let's go check the office, Barry said. The men headed down the main hall. They looked around as they went. Everything was the same as it had been when they'd left the night before. Same stacks of boxes, same animatronic they'd hooked to the wall. Dwayne bent over. I forgot to pick up this tooth last night. We can glue it back in. They went down the hall and leaned into the open door of the office. It looked normal, too, but Hudson wasn't in it. Where the heck is he? Dwayne asked. Barry shook his head. Dwayne laughed. Maybe he finally got smart and left this crummy town. That wouldn't be a bad thing, Barry said. I'd miss him, but he could use a fresh start. Dwayne made a face. The smell is stronger down here. It's coming from the kitchen, I think, Barry said. Let's go check it out. As the two headed toward the kitchen, Barry said, I feel for Hudson. Poor guy deserves to have something go right. And that's how the story ends. Analysis. Reading this story felt like when your friend tries to describe their dream to you, which I'm sure to them was a very profound experience. It was like trippy and weird and strange. They were in their math teacher's class, and then they were suddenly at their job, but their teacher was at their job, and then they opened a door to their job, and now they're in their childhood bedroom, and their ex-girlfriend is there, and then a movie monster comes and chases them, and they run through town, but then the town becomes a video game level, and then suddenly they're back in their room, but their room is also their job, and their boss is there yelling them about homework that they missed. Like, yeah, it's cool, but it's incoherent. I really don't like this book. The story is fine. The book is just not entertaining to actually read. I like how it leaves it open-ended if Hudson set the fire, but in my reading, I think it's very obvious that he did. I'm gonna read the quote where, in my opinion, it confirms that he set the fire. Lewis had disappeared into the kitchen, and Hudson had crawled into the fireplace to hide. The next thing Hudson knew, there was a fire in the fireplace, and then the house was on fire. Hudson barely got out alive. The burns on his legs left him with the nerve damage that had barred him from the Navy. Hudson hunched over in the fireplace, and he listened for Lewis as he looked at Lewis's lighter. When had Hudson taken it? He didn't remember, but it was his now. Hudson could feel Lewis's lighter in his hand. He could feel his thumb on the little starter wheel. Flames started crawling up the curtains next to the fireplace. So he doesn't remember how the lighter got there, but suddenly he's holding it, and then the curtains are on fire. I wonder if he set it. He also says at one point that the fire happened because of Lewis's knife, the one that he threatened him with, which caused him to then go and hide in the fireplace. So I think on some level, Hudson does know that it was his fault. I'm going to read that passage. This is when Hudson has the knife and he's like trying to fight off Foxy. Hudson swung the knife wildly, back and forth and back and forth. The animatronic was on him, reaching for him, clawing at him. And suddenly the knife blade sliced through Hudson's bicep. Hudson screamed, turned, and ran as scorching pain erupted in his arm. Warmth trickled down his bicep, through the crook of his elbow, and from his forearm to his injured wrist. Nothing divided in half is nothing. Lewis's voice called out behind Hudson. Hudson nearly tripped and fell. How could he have forgotten? Lewis, the real Lewis, had said that very same thing when Lewis had slashed Hudson with the knife just before the fire. The knife was the reason the fire happened. Why had Hudson suppressed that memory? Yeah, so I think it's clear that Hudson did it. Lewis threatens him with a knife, cuts him, Hudson hides in the fireplace, he has a lighter, he sets the house on fire, it's all in a disassociative state, and he suppresses the memory. I think Hudson did it. Anyway, the moral is funny because for the first time, I don't think there is one, and I kind of am fine with that. The moral is just, stuff happens, which is what the back of the book says. A string of bad luck you can't seem to shake. That's it. Bad stuff happens sometimes. It's not his fault. Just sometimes weird stuff happens, and I think it's kind of scary that there are people with difficult, painful pasts, and then something like the horrors of the Fazbear, legacy, history, agony, get hold of someone like that, and it just cuts deeper for them than other people. To get super millennial about it, I'm gonna talk about Harry Potter. The agony manifestations in this story remind me of the way that Dementors work in Harry Potter. They make people relive their worst memories and are an obvious allegory for depression. The agony that permeates Fazbear's Frights due to all the Fazbear artifacts and Springtrap seems to be doing a similar thing. The air is so heavy with dark energy that it makes Hudson hallucinate all of the worst things that have ever happened to him. All of his trauma and guilt and his dark past are manifesting themselves to him in this location. This isn't directly stated in the book, but I think it's pretty clear. I'm going to use a quote from Harry Potter that I think spells out how this works. There are horrors in your past that the others don't have. The reason that Fazbear's Frights affects Hudson the way it does is because he has horrors in his past that Barry and Dwayne and Faith don't have. He has trauma. I also think the story answers the question of what's happening to Mike in the real FNAF 3. There's always been questions about whether the phantom animatronics are hallucinations because of the air vents, or are actual apparitions and ghosts, and I think this story makes it pretty clear. The agony of all the Fazbear items being together, especially with Springtrap physically there, manifests your worst nightmares and memories. And so for Mike, that's the Phantoms. That's Foxy, Chica, and Freddy, and Balloon Boy for some reason. I really enjoy the concept of this story, I just hated reading it. I can only read, he was in the bathroom. Suddenly, he was in a different bathroom with different tiles getting a swirly. But then he was back in the normal bathroom and he didn't understand how. So many times before I'm just like, yeah, I get it. It's agony manifestations, it's not real. I do love that it adds lore to agony and manifestations of agony. Again, I'm going to keep using Dementors as an example, but if this is how agony works in the games, then we don't need illusion discs or even nightmare gas. Being surrounded by agony makes you feel bad, makes you see and hear things that aren't real. Maybe Golden Freddy can't teleport. Mike is just surrounded by so much agony in FNAF 1 that he's hallucinating the thing that killed his brother. Golden Freddy is real, he's just a projection. When the posters on the wall change, that's not something the ghosts are doing. That's something that only Mike is seeing because that's frightening to him. Same thing with the shadow animatronics, potentially. I love the concept of agony so much because it gives an explanation for things without being science fiction, which is what a lot of people criticize modern FNAF for being. It's illusion discs, it's remnant experiments, but no, agony, just the idea that dark things, scary things, places where bad things have happened, leave scars on locations and items that can cause you to relive your dark past. That's just great ghost lore. I love it. This story does a great job at connecting those concepts together and explaining the game's lore. This might actually be the most important Fazbear Fright story for solving the games. Maybe second to Fetch because of the 0 point field. The difference is that the 0 point field doesn't actually appear anywhere in the games. We can maybe use it to explain the arcade minigames in the FNAF series, but no one ever says the 0 point field in the actual games. Whereas Agony just seems like something that the ghost can do. Agony's not technically mentioned in the games. We do get Dark Remnant in FNAF AR, but it just seems like that's probably the case in the games as well. This is such an important story, and it sucks that the story sucks. So there's like a million reasons that the story can't actually take place in the continuity of the games, the main one being that Springtrap does not arrive until Night 2 of Mike's shift in FNAF 3. But now, he's here way earlier than that. And you can't even use the fan theory that some people have for FNAF 2 and say that the phone dude's calls are pre-recorded, because Hudson directly states that the phones are not going to be installed into Fazbear's Frights until the day after he's running away from Springtrap. That's why he can't call 911. So it's literally impossible for Phone Dude to say, "We found an animatronic, a real one, over the phone," because the phone doesn't exist before they get the animatronic. There's other things, like it being called Fazbear's Frights instead of Fazbear's Fright, Bonnie being purple, etc. I think this story is set somewhere else in the FNAF multiverse, which I think is also true for the Breaking Wheel. It's similar events, but they echo differently through time and history. Frights fiction-wise, this is just a skewed retelling of FNAF 3. It allows Fazbear to own the character Springtrap. It's a suit with a corpse inside of it. We can make him an attraction at our Pizzaplex. My camera just focused on something behind me, which is kind of frightening, because there's nothing back there. The legends of a Springtrap animatronic with a corpse inside of it are now Fazbear's intellectual property. I don't think that this story has much substance if you remove it from FNAF. I think it's great for lore, but not a good story. With that said, we do need to talk about the other guard, Virgil. Virgil is a very weird name, and so it should jump out to you. There was a poet named Virgil in like 50 BC, who was a very famous historical writer. But when people use the name Virgil, typically they're referencing the character Virgil from Dante's Divine Comedy. In Dante's Divine Comedy, Virgil is the real person Virgil, but typically people are referencing the character, not the person. Dante's Divine Comedy is split into 3 books. It's about the author Dante being visited by Virgil the poet and being guided through 3 afterlives: Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. It's not Catholic canon, but it's where a lot of our culture's depictions of the Christian afterlife comes from. When Dante wrote the Divine Comedy, he made his guide through Inferno Virgil, his favorite ancient poet. So this fictional version of Virgil is almost more famous than the real Virgil. In the story, because Virgil was pagan, he can't go to heaven, so he's actually stuck in Purgatorio because he wasn't baptized. He can walk through Inferno, but that's not technically where he belongs, but he cannot go to Paradiso. So Virgil being the other guard at Fazbear's Fright makes sense. It is a dark and evil place, but he's the day guard. He's not in the Inferno like Hudson, he's in Purgatorio. It's not bad, it's not good. But that means that Hudson is in Inferno, and I'm calling it Inferno for a reason. Because fire. Because Hudson's traumatic past involves setting his house on fire and killing his mom and Lewis, and then of course he ends up dying in the oven, which is a fire, where he gets cooked alive. I guess in this reading, Paradiso has to be the character Faith, or like that's where she belongs. I think it's fairly obvious then why her name is Faith, but she's not a good person, she's kind of rude and mean to Hudson, I don't know. It's possible that she's not objectively a good person, it's just that Hudson really likes her, and so to him, she's his heaven? We get this line, "They went out for pizza. He thought he died and gone to heaven." That's how good their first date was, so like, the story's not exactly hiding it. This story is wearing the skin of Dante's Divine Comedy, but I don't know if it's saying anything with it. It's obviously very intentional on Andrea Wagner's part. You do not name your characters Faith and Virgil and then have a third character catch on fire by accident. This is a very clear reference to the Divine Comedy. And if all that wasn't obvious enough, we get this quote from Hudson as he's trying to psych himself up to stay the night.
"This is not rocket science," he thought. "Nor is it an advance into enemy territory, a fight with deadly demons, or a descent into hell. It's just a tour through a building It has a lot of old, creepy stuff.
But he is wrong, of course. What do you mean by it, Andrea? What does this have to do with the themes of that story? Are you just mentioning it because it's a cool thing? What are you doing, Andrea? Hudson's grandmother also practices voodoo, which doesn't really mesh with all the other Christian symbolism, so I don't know what that's about. Moving on from the discussion of Dante, there's 2 references to dogs for some reason. He wanted to surrender, wave the white flag, and roll over on his back like a submissive puppy. And then later, when he gets thrown across the room by a ghost, it says, Hudson bellowed at the top of his lungs. Then he panted like a dog. I don't know if Andrea Wagner did this on purpose, but it calls Hudson a dog twice. I don't know if that's important, but it is there. Hudson doesn't like the animatronics. They give him the willies. I said the willies! A lot of stuff from the Frights location comes from a landfill, so we once again have haunted or evil objects coming from dumps. This is something that keeps happening in these stories. And then, of course, I need to read the most important passage in this whole book. It is describing Springtrap. At first glance, the robotic character attached to the wall appeared to be a rabbit, sort of. With fur of greenish yellow, this was no ordinary rabbit, though not even a cartoon rabbit. It was the kind of rabbit Dr. Frankenstein might have created if he wanted to build a rabbit instead of a man. It's Frankenstein, get it? And that was what we found. Next up, the 8th Stitch Wraith Stinger. Thank you for watching. Be sure to be nice to each other in the comments. Consider supporting the creators you admire, and never lose sight of the things that are important to you. And remember that Freddy's stands for Friendly, Respectful Engagement, Discussion, and Discourse Yields Success. I would like to thank my June patrons. Brandon, Lauren V, Morgan, Nan, Scott, Sophie, Suka, and Wooly, as well as Billy, Chamikon, Klaus, Eliza, Halmar, Johnny the Night Guard, Kira, Lauren R, Rhiannon, Rose, Sebhar, Thamagata, World's Greatest Bard, Yaboy Peachy, and Zannyface, as well as Emily, Gremlin, HHD, Jinx, Jose, Kenneth, Mustard Shirt Guy, Rolo, and Riley, as well as Ellie, Jojo, Jeannie, Mariuna, and Ray. I would also like to thank my Night Guards. Those who made it to Night 1, Violet Puppy, Haley, Sophie, Poppy, Bob, Theory Chum, Riley, JT Kelly 18, Golden Productions, Louie, and Jackie. As well as those who made it to Night 2, Miss Trap and Ya Boy Peachy, as well as those who made it to Night 3, Just Because and The Moving Marker, and those who made it to Night 4, A Bored Person, Omni Soap, Bowie, Hannah K, Jazz, Darilight, DP Musique, Zora Tunicatoon, Lucas, Zeta, Nuka, TC, Tom, Vanessa, Jungle Boy, Bonafide, Rattler, JJ Abrams, Lisa, Daniel, Hopine, Pastel Ghost, Leanne, Broken Spoon, B-Dub CEO, June, Kiyomi, Gremlin, One's Up, Amaranth, Glorp, Absolix Guardian, Asker, Minecraft Enjoyer, Pickle Pepper 900, Fritz, Henry Entertainment, Asteroid Panda, Arcadeus, Shrapnel Stars, Klondike 12, Thramak, Jam, Brian, Amateur Short, and Ice Mint.